So right now my life is filled with wedding plans. I'm getting married in October. And when I tell you I'm up to here with wedding plans, I'm up to here with wedding plans. So when I sat down this week to get ready for my homily, I sat down thinking I was going to get a little getaway from all the wedding planning. Much to my surprise, when I sat down, I almost felt as if God was trying to get in on the wedding plans God's self. I was like, wait a minute, God, what are you doing? So any of you that have planned an event know that there's all kinds of details that go into planning a party. What foods will you serve? What drinks will you serve? What will you be wearing? Who will you invite? Today's scriptures challenge us to think about how we see ourselves and how in turn that may be affecting our relationship with God and God's people. Humble and humility are words that we are reminded of today. In the first reading, the book of Sirach tells us to act accordingly. None of us are more to act accordingly. The more you humble yourself, the greater you will find. The more you humble yourself, the greater favor you will find with God. Do right by God's people, and by doing right by God's people, you are doing right by God. How do you do right by God's people? By loving God's people, by being the hands of Christ to those around you, by helping those when you can. In the letter to the Hebrews today, the author takes us on a whirlwind of feelings. We go from feeling really fearful of God's presence on Mount Sinai, with those who could hear and understand God's message, beg that nothing else be said to them, to feeling really thankful for receiving God's presence on Mount Zion. Brothers and sisters, we don't know when our time will come. Therefore, let us live our lives in a way that makes us ready to receive God's kingdom. Today, in the Gospel of Luke, we hear a story of Jesus being invited to the home of one of the leading Pharisees. Here they were watching Jesus, waiting for him to mess up, waiting to see if he was going to say something crazy. Little did they know that Jesus was watching them. Jesus tells the people at the party a story of who they should invite to their feast. He didn't say go through your contacts and invite those you know, those that you're comfortable with. According to the gospel, we should humble ourselves enough to invite those who would normally be cast out: the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Invite those who you know would not be able to repay you. This is just another instance of Jesus welcoming people to God's table. People that otherwise wouldn't be welcome. After not feeling the slightest bit welcome at another church, I found myself lost spiritually. That is until I found myself walking through those doors. It was until those doors that I was blind to God's love. One of my favorite parts of Mass is before communion when Father says, all are welcome to the table of the Lord. Here at Holy Family, we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. Here, everyone, truly everyone is welcome. It's one thing to do it here, but how are we going outside and extending that love to God and God's people? How welcoming are we being to God's children? How welcoming are we being to God's children every day in our lives? To those we work with, to those we live with, to those we pass every day on our way to work. Mother Teresa has a list of 15 ways to become more humble. A few of them, you can see them right here, a few of them that spoke out to me were, speak as little as possible about yourself. How many of us have ever called somebody and wanted to talk to somebody and all they can do is just talk about themselves? It's a little annoying, right? The second one that stuck out to me was, keep busy with your own affairs and not others. I know I'm guilty of being a little nosy. You can ask my mom. I'm a little nosy. But no, stop and only worry about what concerns you. Avoid curiosity. When I first read that, I was like, what are you talking about, Mother Teresa? It's good to be curious. What she was referring to was, don't be concerned with things that aren't your concern. Not everything is about you. Accept small irritations with good humor. This one's kind of hard. Throughout the day, we have people that might bother us, and we want to explode. It might be hard, right? It might be hard to think about now, but take time to pray about it, and you might just be able to find something a little funny about that. Accept being contempt, being forgotten, and being disregarded. This one's a little tough because none of us, we're human. We want to be remembered. We want to be thought of. It always feels good. But today's lesson in humbleness is not always about that. Accept insults. That one's hard. A lot of times when somebody's insulting you, it says more about them than it does about yourself. And the last one that stuck out to me was give in discussions even when you know you're right. For those of us that live with any kind of partner, roommate, or anything, you know that this can be kind of tough. But sometimes it might just be easy. That might be how we can extend God's loving grace to those around us, just by saying, hey, you know what? You're right. I'm right, but you're right. In all seriousness, I pray that we are all humble enough to know how blessed we are to be God's children. To know that even though we may not feel worthy, we all have a place at the table of God. Thank you.